Hey, everybody. Welcome to Talking Hockey Sense. My name is Chris Peters. It's episode 131 of the podcast, and we're glad to have you along the ride here as we are kicking it into full swing. We are getting through this season. It's been opening weekend after opening weekend. We've got one more on the docket for you at FloHockey as the ECHL and SPHL will start their seasons this weekend. But last weekend, it was all about the AHL. We're going to talk about that today. We're also going to answer your burning prospect questions. We're also going to recap some of the things that we've talked about in the last couple of podcasts, including the NCAA and CHL situation that is ongoing. Got a lot of feedback from last week's episode with Brad Schlossman, a lot of feedback from within the industry, which was very interesting to hear, and certainly a lot of different perspectives. So we'll talk about that in the Q&A portion, because I do have a Q&A question about the CHL-NCAA and the possibilities there. But yeah, we are going to talk about a lot of different things, but really want to focus at the early part of this podcast on the AHL. And before I get to that, just want to remind you guys, if you have not yet, now is the best time to subscribe. Get your annual subscription to FloHockey. You'll get access to the AHL, ECHL, SPHL, USHL, college hockey, the CJHL, BCHL, so many more leagues. And also recently we added 100 English language games from the Swedish Hockey League as well. So there are a lot of different ways that you can follow your favorite prospects by subscribing to FloHockey. And also make sure you're following this podcast on the Flow Sports app, on FloHockey.tv, on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. We thank you for that. All right. Let's talk about the AHL and the season that has just begun. And boy, was an exciting and interesting opening weekend across the AHL. I probably watched, I had multiple screens going. So I think I had at any one time at least 3 games going at once. I was trying to focus in on some that included some of the bigger prospects. And boy, did we get a lot to evaluate from that. A lot of really, really great performances individually, a lot of team performances. The Hershey Bears raised their 13th Calder Cup banner. Also, want to remind you, 2 weeks ago, we had Patrick Williams on. Patrick, of course, now the AHL beat writer for FloHockey. He's got a ton of great pieces out that you'll definitely want to read. And one of them is about Yaroslav Askarov. And this is a guy that I really have been tracking for years and years, since I think the first time I saw him was at the 2019 or 2018 Hlinka Gretzky Cup. So he was a draft -1 at that event. And then we saw him again in the World Under-18s that year, where he had a tremendous showing against Team USA, basically cost them a shot at the gold medal. And we've been following his career going on. Now he's moved to the San Jose Sharks organization, got his very first start with the San Jose Barracuda. And what does he do? A 22-save shutout for the Barracuda. So this has been one of the really interesting goalies. He was one of the highest drafted goalies in the last decade, selected 11th overall by Nashville. He, of course, requested a trade out of Nashville. There really wasn't a path for him to becoming an NHL starter in Nashville. And while he could have continued to develop and, played his cards and whatever else and spent more time with Milwaukee, he wanted a clearer path to being a number one. UC Saros is not going anywhere anytime soon. So obviously there was going to be an opportunity. The San Jose Sharks put together a package to get Askarov to their NHL roster. Now, he didn't make the team out of camp. He was injured in training camp or injured before training camp, so he didn't really get many reps. So then they send him to the Barracuda, and he goes and has a shutout in his first game against the Ontario Reign. And really, it's kind of vintage Askarov, right? He's one of those guys that just does everything so well. And certainly a guy that, he's not always consistent. I think if there's anything that he doesn't do well, it's consistency. He's got a bit of an orthodox style. He's a little wild in the net, but he's incredibly athletic. He's incredibly competitive, and he's incredibly fun to watch. And of course, after he shut out the Ontario Reign, he did his patented closed the net down, turned it over on its side, made sure that nothing was getting in for the rest of the night. Sorry, folks, we're closed. He turns that down, and then it creates a great celebration. So that was one of the performances that really stood out. Another great goaltending performance was another goalie we've talked a lot about on this podcast over the last few years. He played in ECHL 2 years ago, AHL all of last season, was a first-round draft pick as well, and that's Sebastian Cossa. currently of the Grand Rapids Griffins in the Detroit Red Wings organization. And Cossa had a 35-save shutout in his season debut. He did play back-to-back, gave up 4 goals the next night in a loss. But again, this is the learning curve that the Detroit Red Wings want him to be on. He's going to have those highs and those lows. Playing in back-to-back games in particular is a challenge, and that's one of the things that they're doing to ramp him up to being an NHL starter. Anymore, it's very rare where goalies will start on back-to-back nights at the NHL level, but it is an important skill for him to develop now in the AHL in the event that he does have to be a back-to-back starter in the NHL. So all of these opportunities that he's had, that's really important. And so we're seeing that repeatedly where he's getting these opportunities, he's getting the reps. Now, the Red Wings just sent Ville Husso down to the AHL. They also have Malcolm Subban down there. So Cossa doesn't have to play all the time, but he should be getting probably close to 50 games this season. And that's really going to be the telltale sign for him in terms of his readiness. Now, his numbers have been the same over the last 2 years, both in Toledo in the ECHL 2 years ago and Grand Rapids last year. Grand Rapids went on a run. He went on a huge run as well, where they just weren't losing games. And that level of consistency is what he needs to continue to establish in order to make that next step. But we're seeing it. Watching AHL games on FloHockey, I continue to see the progression of these players. I watched a lot of them last year. Now I'm going to be watching them even closer this year because of the ease that I have now that it's part of what we do here at Flo. And really, you know, guys like Askarov and Cossa and everybody else and these goalies, it's all about reps and time and getting used to things. And some guys can get used to it really quick. Some guys it's going to take a few years. And then sometimes it's just a matter of what the NHL roster looks like. And I think teams are taking this patient approach with development, particularly with goaltenders, and it allows these players to really flourish and then arrive to the NHL ready. There are plenty of players that are ready to play in the NHL. There are fewer players that are ready to make an impact at the NHL level. The AHL has traditionally been a place where they're able to kind of establish that. And that's why when we saw Kevin Korchinski of the Chicago Blackhawks, now of the Rockford IceHogs, he spent all of last season in the NHL. Not typical that you're going to see a guy get sent back to the AHL after spending an entire season at the NHL level. Last year, Korchinski was ready to play in the NHL. He was not necessarily ready to make an impact. He did play pretty well. There were a lot of great nights for him, but there wasn't that level of consistency. In the first game he plays for the Rockford IceHogs, his first ever AHL game, he goes coast to coast. And now if you're a Chicago Blackhawks fan, you're like, see, he shouldn't be down there. He shouldn't be down there. No. Let me tell you, why is he down there? He's down there to get minutes. He's not going to get the top 4 minutes with the NHL roster. We talked about this with Patrick Williams 2 weeks ago. We're going to talk about it again because when you see those plays and you see a player dominate or make a very advanced play, as Korchinski did by going coast to coast and scoring a goal, you say, okay, well, he's obviously ready. Let's see him do that repeatedly. Let's see him continue to take over games. Let's see him take over a shift. Let's see him run their power play. Let's see him do things that top defensemen do. And, you know, Scott Powers from The Athletic wrote a story about Korchinski, spoke with Korchinski, and he's on board with what the Blackhawks are doing. And that is so important. Player buy-in on a development plan is probably one of the single most important things to getting them to where they need to be. If the player doesn't believe he should be in the AHL and he doesn't work like and it either saps his confidence or he's not taking it seriously, that can have a detrimental effect. But Korchinski is too important to the Blackhawks rebuild that he has to be in this place. So I think it's a great place for him to be. And he showed that by having a very strong game against Grand Rapids. That was the team that put 4 goals up on Sebastian Cossa, one of those being Korchinski's goal. And also shout out to Rockford for the Screw City jerseys that they were rocking, all blacks, and they looked pretty darn good there as well. A couple of other prospects that stood out on opening weekend. Logan Mailloux, 4-point game against Providence for Laval, had 2 goals, 2 assists, and was the best player on the ice. I mean, just bar none, best player on the ice. He's number 1 defenseman for Laval. The next night he struggled. And again, with Logan Mailloux, it's not about offense. We already know he can produce. We already know he has skill. It's the play away from the puck. It's the ability to shut down the opposition. It's ability to use your size to your advantage. And that's going to be a learning process still. So just because he had 4 points right away doesn't mean he's going to get that call up immediately to the Habs. And as we've seen, I watched the Montreal game last night. And I watched Lane Hudson because he's one of the most fascinating players. Offensively, he's doing all of the things that he could do in college. Defensively, it's been a bit of a struggle. And in that game in particular against Pittsburgh, it was a real struggle for him. So those are the types of things. You need Logan Mailloux to get to a certain level. And we'll see, if Lane Hudson, it seems like he's going to be able to have to learn at the NHL level how to defend at that level. But clearly his offensive game is advanced enough to do it. Also wanted to give a little notice on Aiden McDonough, and he was the player of the week in the AHL last weekend. 4 goals, had a hat trick on opening night, another power play goal the next day for the Charlotte Checkers. Now, Aiden McDonough was a draft pick, a 7th round draft pick of the Vancouver Canucks. He far exceeded draft expectations by having a great collegiate career with Northeastern. He goes there, has, a big time goal scorer. Last season in the AHL, he really struggled. He could not get that scoring touch. He could not get that level of consistency. Vancouver opts not to sign him. He doesn't get an NHL contract anywhere else. Now he's back in the AHL, and he's only 24 years old, and he had 4 goals on the opening weekend. This is a player that's taking it seriously, that's saying, I want to get back, and I will do what I have to do to get back. If he keeps scoring like that, he's going to get another crack at the NHL, especially at his age. Saw Brad Lambert and Nikita Chibrikov watch their games against Iowa this weekend for the Manitoba Moose. Really talented offensively. Chibrikov has certainly taken a step. His strength is improved. Brad Lambert, we already knew he was an NHL level skater. That is the case. 3 assists for him this weekend for Manitoba in a sweep. And I really liked what I saw from Marco Kasper as well. A lot of Detroit fans thought that Kasper should be on the big roster. Didn't necessarily make it. They bring him back there. And he has a real good opportunity to continue to be a leading player for the Grand Rapids Griffins. Even got into a fight with Colton Dock, who is a couple inches taller and about 20 pounds heavier, I think. And those two guys got into a very spirited scrap, and Kasper handled himself well. I think, long-term, Marco Kasper is probably going to be a really talented middle six center. But this gives him an opportunity to see, hey, is there a little more there? By being in Rockford. And then also, lastly, with this, the Hershey Bears raised their banner one night. Ethan Frank scores a hat trick in the banner raising night. They have a win. The next night, Ivan Miroshnichenko has a hat trick for Hershey to get the win. They did not get the win in that game, but Miroshnichenko, who was, a guy that I think we thought might make the Capitals, he's again going through and taking part of the process and scoring 3 goals on opening weekend and making an impact. And boy, is his shot looking real good right now. Watched, all 3 of his goals. We've got them all clipped for you. You can see a ton of AHL highlights on FloHockey.tv, on the Flow Sports app, and on our YouTube page. I mean, go ahead and watch that because he was uncorking on some of those pucks there. Ivan Miroshnichenko, I think, is on a fast track here. And to think of how far that young man has come. He went through cancer in his draft year. He still gets drafted in the first round. Think about the faith that the Washington Capitals had in the player, and he is making good on that by playing very well. Before we move on from the AHL opening weekend, I do want to let you know next week we have a game of the week. And if you didn't know this, we didn't talk about it because we hadn't announced it yet last time we had Patrick Williams on. AHL game of the week, it's live on social. So if you are a FloHockey subscriber, you can continue to watch on the Flow Sports app. You can watch on FloHockey.tv, however you interact with the game, you can still do that. However, for those of you that aren't subscribers yet, and maybe you're not sure and you want to figure it out and see what we have to offer, Saturday night, Manitoba versus Grand Rapids. We have the Winnipeg Jets affiliate versus the Detroit Red Wings affiliate. That will be free on YouTube, on X, and on Facebook. You'll be able to see it on Flow Hockey's Facebook page and the AHL Facebook page. So if you're already following the AHL, you should be able to find out where to find that. So make sure you check that out. It'll be Manitoba versus Grand Rapids Saturday night at 7 p.m. Eastern on social platforms. Make sure you are following at Flow Hockey across all of those social platforms. All right. As I mentioned at the top of the show, we are getting into the ECHL season next. We have had opening weekend after opening weekend after opening weekend. We had junior in September, college in early October, AHL last week, and now it's ECHL and SPHL, both starting off on the same night. Friday, October 18th, we will have a full slate for you on FloHockey. We will also have on Friday night an ECHL game of the week live on social, just as I described for the AHL. Kicking us off, Kansas City Mavericks versus the Wichita Thunder. Mavericks are the Seattle Kraken ECHL affiliate. The Thunder are affiliated with the San Jose Sharks. And Kansas City last season made it all the way to the Kelly Cup Finals and also was the regular season champion and one of the very best teams in the league. We'll see what their roster looks like on opening night, but we'll have a lot of preview content for you on FloHockey as well. Before we get to that, though, let's talk. You can go read that one on your own time, but since you're already listening to the podcast, we might as well break it down. So real quick, coming into the season, major storyline: can anyone stop the Florida Everblades? They have won 3 consecutive Kelly Cups, and I cannot stress enough. We talked with Patrick Williams a couple weeks ago about how difficult it is to repeat as a champion at the minor league level, and Hershey has done it. And now we've had Florida was the very first team to three-peat in the ECHL. Can they make it 4 in a row? There are going to be some differences. They'll still be able to have a number of the veteran players that they're used to having, but they are now affiliated with the St. Louis Blues, so that's a different dynamic. They were affiliated with the Florida Panthers, so that changes things a little bit. St. Louis has not typically been a team that has utilized the ECHL as much. That seems to be changing, and I think that's actually changing across the board. More and more teams are sending players to get extra seasoning in the ECHL and then giving them that chance at the AHL level. It's a great way to do it, especially with the younger players that are fresh out of junior hockey, players that are, coming right out of college. Some of them need that extra time. The ECHL provides the challenge. The league continues to get younger, and as a result, you're seeing a lot more of an emphasis on development. So we'll see how St. Louis interacts with the Florida Everblades. But a chance for a three-peat, and you think about all the things that have been going on in Florida away from the ice. The Everblades had to cancel some of their preseason games. So the hurricanes and everything else, there's been a lot of distraction and everything like that. So hopefully the good people in Florida will have an opportunity to take a break from all of the craziness that's been their last couple of weeks and get a chance to enjoy some hockey out there, and including, you've got the defending Stanley Cup champion not far away either with the Florida Panthers. Another thing I'm really looking forward to in this ECHL season, 2 new teams, the Tahoe Night Monsters, co-owned by Tim Tebow. Yes, that Tim Tebow. He is the co-owner. And yes, they are based in Lake Tahoe and in the Lake Tahoe region. And boy, I wonder how difficult those free agent discussions were. Hey, would you like to come live in Tahoe for an entire hockey season? Yeah, sign me up. Where do I sign up for that? I'll take that any day of the week. Also, the Bloomington Bison will be in the league as well. They are owned by the same ownership group that owns the Indy Fuel, so another ECHL team. They are affiliated with the New York Rangers, and if I didn't mention it, the Tahoe Night Monsters, of course, affiliated with the Golden Knights. But the Bloomington Bison, a red, white, and blue color scheme, and black in that as well. They have a bison on their jersey. That bison is wearing a top hat, just like Abe Lincoln does, the stovetop hat. And I saw their preseason game this weekend, and I don't want to alarm you, but they're going to be skating out of an inflatable bison with a top hat, with the stovetop hat on. It looks incredible. And I'm sure we will clip that and post that onto FloHockey for you very soon because I love it, and it was a lot of fun. But for the Bison on the ice, things are going to be really difficult this year because they're in the Central Division. And I think the balance of power in the ECHL, even though we know that the Idaho Steelheads out in the mountain, the Kansas City Mavericks out in the mountain have been very tough. The teams in the South, with Florida in particular, being very tough. They are going to be very good teams, but you look at the rosters that have been put together by Toledo, which is a perennial power in the league, Fort Wayne, which is one of the most historic franchises in all of minor league hockey. And then you also look at the Cincinnati Cyclones, who will be getting a lot of help from their new affiliate, the Toronto Maple Leafs, which have been very liberal with their use of the ECHL to develop prospects. We are talking about a wagon of a division here. And the way the ECHL playoffs are set up, only one of those teams is going to come out of the division and have an opportunity to win the Kelly Cup. And will they beat up each other so much that it makes room for everybody else? But I do think if you want to watch some real high quality hockey, take a look at that Central Division games when you see Toledo or Fort Wayne on the schedule. Indy is going to be quite good. Kalamazoo, Iowa, Bloomington. These are teams. I really think the balance of power is with Fort Wayne, with Toledo. Toledo has Brandon Hawkins back for another season, one of the great scorers in this league. Fort Wayne has a mix of veteran guys. They brought in Alex Aliardi, who played for the Rapid City Rush last year, an ECHL All-Star, a veteran guy that's won a Kelly Cup. So there's a lot to look forward to in that Central Division. And I call games for the Iowa Heartlanders occasionally. And so I'm going to get a chance to see these teams a lot. So maybe a little bit of a Central Coast bias. We don't have coasts over here. But that's kind of the thing is I think there's going to be a lot of talent in that division, and we're going to see a lot of scoring in those games. But definitely on Friday night and throughout the weekend, make sure you are tuning in to the ECHL on FloHockey. Also, the SPHL, really entertaining league. A lot of very fascinating games in that group. They start as well. So we will have the entire FloHockey universe, I guess we'll call it, like the Marvel universe kind of thing, or the metaverse. I'm not even sure where we're at, or the multiverse, not the metaverse. We're talking about so many verses right now. I don't even know where we're talking about, but there will be a lot of hockey on FloHockey. 21,000 games, more than 21,000 games will be on FloHockey this year. If you are a diehard hockey fan, get the Flow Sports app, get an annual subscription, and start watching hockey. I flipped around to about 6 or 7 different games in a night. I flip across leagues. You can favorite your leagues on the connected TV apps. It's really easy. It's really fun. And if you want to watch the NHL, continue to watch the NHL. It's great. It's available. It's accessible. Do it however you want. If you want to watch the wave of the future, we have such a large chunk of it on FloHockey. So we want to make sure that you're watching it. It's been a lot of fun for us to create content around it, to do a lot more. And we've got some great AHL related content coming your way very soon. Also coming soon on FloHockey, I mentioned at the top of the show, we have the Swedish Hockey League, and I'll continue to plug that because I think if you are a fan of pro prospects, the Swedish Hockey League outside of the North American affiliated leagues is usually where we're going to see the highest concentration of NHL draft picks. And so we've got 100 games, English commentary. They're multiple times per week. This week, we've got Rogla versus Örebro on September 17th. That game is at 1 p.m. We also have Frölunda at Växjö, and that'll be another great game. Those are some fascinating games with a lot of high-end prospects. We had Skellefteå on over the weekend, so it was the SHL debut of first-rounder Michael Brandsegg Nygaard, and also we saw Axel Sandin Pellikka in that game, two high-profile Detroit Red Wings draft picks. So if you're a Detroit Red Wings fan, I know we have a few that are asking questions in the next part of the podcast here. I think FloHockey's pretty much got almost your entire system in one place right here with all the SHL games we have, and then the Griffins and the Toledo Walleye. So I think, if you're in Detroit, I mean, just a shout out there. All right. That's enough plugging and different things. I already mentioned the SPHL. We got the ECHL and the AHL game of the week. Watch all that great USHL action on the horizon. This week we've had the BCHL showcase, which was going on over Canadian Thanksgiving weekend. A lot of different games in the CJHL, the OJHL, and there's just a lot of really exciting things to follow. So make sure you're doing that. But now is the time in the show, and we haven't done this in a while, so I feel out of practice, but I'm glad to get it back going. This is the time where I turn it over to you, the listener, and you help me create the content by asking really good questions. And I can tell you right now, FloHockey and Talking Hockey Sense listeners ask the best questions, and then hopefully I try to sound smart answering them. So I'm going to take my little sip of water, get hydrated, get ready, because we are going to dive in. There are quite a few questions. We're going to get through them as quickly as we can. But we're also going to be thorough about it. And as I mentioned, we're going to talk things about the NHL draft, the NCAA, and the college hockey situation that's ongoing. And we're also going to talk about the AHL and some other things. So we got a lot of great questions. So without further ado, first hydrate, and then we're going to do our first question. All right. Now I'm ready. Here we go. Our first one comes from Hockey Shawnee, and this is going to allow us to talk about the NCAA and CHL. With the NCAA and CHL seemingly coming to some eligibility agreement very soon, is there an expectation that the CHL-AHL eligibility rules may change very soon as well? If not, could we see a lot of very good prospects leaving the CHL in their draft year to have more options in their draft plus one? Sean, this is Hockey Shawnee. This is a great question. We talked a little bit about this with Brad Schlossman last week, but I think we need to dive into it further. I've had a lot of different conversations with people in hockey, and there's a lot of confusion yet about how things are going to go. The one thing I want to clean up from the question that was asked is that there is not going to be an agreement between the NCAA and the CHL. This is simply the NCAA allowing CHL players to come play in the league, to have eligibility to play in the league. My assumption is that there will not be a transfer agreement unless, somebody steps in and says, let's do it this way. But basically, anything that kind of limits player movement at this point seems like it's going to be subject to a lawsuit and antitrust laws. And I think there's going to be a lot of fallout from this. And I wonder too, is Canadian junior hockey going to be immune to this? I don't understand U.S. antitrust laws enough to even, to say what is Canadian antitrust laws like. But what I will say is that the theory that Brad Schlossman proposed last week was an interesting one, in that would players, like let's say Gavin McKenna, choose to play college hockey in his draft season after playing 2 years of junior in the CHL? I'm not 100% positive about that. I think it could go either way. It's kind of a preference thing. Do you want to go? You still have to stay eligible in college. You have to go to class. You have to do all these things to remain NCAA eligible. You have to do all that in the first semester. Second semester is kind of the Wild West at times for players that are on their way to pro. But that's the question. So one of the things that people kind of addressed with me, and we had positive comments, we had critical comments about last week's podcast, and what came of that was, some people were saying, hey, like the CHL player agreement between the team and the player, where the team essentially commits to pay their education, and then there's, is that going to be a binding contract? There are some people that think it absolutely will be. There are some people that think it absolutely won't be. The other thing is too, is like, I think if there's a monetary structure. So let's say if Gavin McKenna gets drafted out of the Medicine Hat Tigers, well, then Medicine Hat is entitled to a certain monetary compensation for that. And so, that's the other thing, is like, CHL teams don't want to lose these players before they're drafted. And I don't know that they necessarily will. I think there's a lot of people that believe CHL players are going to just continue on the path that they're on. They want to get to pro. But as you mentioned, and this is the important part of what Sean's question asks, is would they move to college in order to get away from the AHL agreement? What I think is going to happen before that even has a chance to be a thing is, I do think that the NHL, the AHL, the CHL, I think all stakeholders are probably going to have a conversation, but more importantly, the NHL and the NHLPA are going to have to get together and talk about the collective bargaining agreement. Because as you mentioned, right now, if I'm a player that I got drafted out of the London Knights, and of course I probably would never have a chance in making the London Knights, or any team that we talk about on this show for that matter. I mean, I've gained a little weight in my years here. I would not be able to go to the AHL until after my age 19 season. And so but right now, if I were to get drafted out of the USHL, out of college hockey, I go to the AHL whenever I want. And so I do think that they're going to have to clean up the language in that. What I don't know necessarily is how much longer that AHL agreement is necessarily going to stay in place as it is currently. So I think that this is going to be a CBA question more than it is an NCAA or a CHL question. Really, they don't get much say. The CBA can really have a significant influence on this ruling, because as of right now, the rules for college players on a college path and players on a major junior path are much different. So there's a lot to sort through. This is a conversation that we are going to continue to have on this podcast because there are so many moving parts and so many unknown things. What we are fairly positive will happen, though, is that CHL players will be eligible. What we don't know is basically anything that comes after that, because once those players become eligible, it changes the entire dynamic of the developmental structure. It also changes the outlook for a lot of players that were on a college path that may now find themselves outside looking in. But we also hope that there is going to be increase in teams. It's easier said than done. Just because the player pool demands more teams doesn't mean we'll get more teams. So a lot of moving parts, but Hockey Shawnee, thank you for that great question to allow us to readdress some of the things from last week's podcast. All right. Our next question, we're gonna talk NHL Draft now, 2025 NHL Draft, and this one comes from Chasing the Puck. What's your early read on the quality of the 2025 draft, both in terms of the top end talent as well as overall depth of the draft? Thanks. I think early in the season, it's far too early to tell the depth of the draft. I think, the depth of the draft is so subjective, and it's saying, the way that I view it, the depth of the draft is that the first round is very strong. You still feel like once the first round is over, you're going to be able to get a significant amount of value out of your early second round draft prospects. And then there's good options in the mid ranges. With that, I think in terms of what the top end of this draft looks like, I don't think it's, I don't think there's anybody that's of the caliber of a Connor Bedard or a Macklin Celebrini. I think James Higgins is an exceptional player. I don't think he's at the same level as those two particular players that were number one draft picks in the last two drafts. This is probably one of the weaker American draft classes that we've seen, which I've said before on this is that, I just don't think there's a high level of first round talent among the Americans in this class. There are a number of players that certainly have the capability, but we'll have to wait and see as this goes on. It's a very strong year for Canadian players. You think Porter Martone, Matthew Schaefer, Michael Misa, the list goes on and on and on. Those are just like some of the top guys, but you keep going down and down and further down, and you're saying, wow, there's a lot of real strong Canadian talent. Not a great year for Finland. You've got Anton Frundell among the Swedes, and there's a number of Swedish players that I think will go in the first round this year. It's a decent goalie draft as well. Usually when you start seeing goalies get projected into the first round, it kind of tells you a little bit about the draft, I feel. Because I think if you had a stronger draft, you're not drafting goalies in the first round. This year we've got, a couple of goalies that look like they could be first round talents this year. So, I think in terms of the quality of the draft, I think it's probably, closer to average. I think there's a lot left to be determined about the class, but I mean, among the Canadian players, it's very, very strong. I mean, this is a year where I think that we'll see a lot of Canadians go in the top 10, and a lot of Canadians go in the top 20. So, I think it's going to be a good year for that country, and it's been more competitive over the years where you've got Slovaks going number one, you got Americans going number one, you got all this other thing, so there's still a lot of talent there. But I'd say, the top end talent is exciting. Matthew Schaefer being far and away looking like the number one defenseman this year. I don't think there's a ton of guys really challenging or stepping up to really challenge him for that. So that's the other thing is positionally, it's okay. So I don't necessarily think that it's super strong. I don't think it's weak. I don't think it's deep. It's too early to say that it's deep. So hopefully that answers your question, Chasing the Puck. Next one comes from Luke. And Luke says, there seems to be a clear top five shaping up for this year's draft. Hagen, Schaefer, McQueen, Misa, and Martone. who's the guy that you think has the most potential to rise and pass one of those guys? Well, it's a little cheating because I think I've had him there all year, and maybe you just didn't mention him, but I think Anton Frundell is a guy that will get himself into this discussion in a real meaningful way. I think that he's a player that has size, strength, skill, can take over a game, can take over a shift. He's dealt with injury issues though, so the risk factor is a little higher with him. But what I'd say with Frundell is that, talking to a lot of scouts that saw him last year, they're just like, hey, if he's even close to the kid that we saw last year, it's going to be real hard not to get him into that, top 3, top 5 for sure range. So I think that's one guy that's right in the mix there, a guy that I like a lot for that. So I think that he's one to break up that party. I think McQueen is a guy, he's got his real fans. There's definitely some detractors. I think the feet are still a concern there. But that's one where I think, hey, Anton Frundell, Porter Martone, James Hagens, Matthew Schaefer. I mean, those and the hot start Michael Misa has had, the goal scoring that he's shown, really important for him. And he's gotten himself right back into this conversation about the number one or the top 5 picks in this draft, and it's been great to see him, really start to take command there. All right. Our next one comes from Mariucci guy, and I have a feeling I know why he is curious about this one. How much is LJ Mooney's size going to scare away NHL scouts? Likely he falls out of the first round. So we've talked about this a little bit before, and LJ Mooney is committed to the University of Minnesota that play out of Mariucci or 3M Arena at Mariucci. I can't remember how it goes now, but apologies to sponsors that don't sponsor this show. But anyway, LJ Mooney, the size factor is a concern for scouts, and he took a very vicious hit in their game against Notre Dame. Luckily, he was okay, not a serious injury, but he did leave that game, and it was a reminder. And we have a question coming up very shortly here. In fact, our next question after this one that'll address Alex Zetterberg, and Zetterberg was a little bit bigger than Mooney was, and still didn't get drafted. And I think one of the things that scared people away about him was that he took a hit at the under 18 Worlds where it was it would have been a normal hit for any player, but for a 5'7", 5'8" player, it was head contact and he was out for the tournament. And so, those are the types of concerns that exist. Now, the reason that I think LJ Mooney is going to be picked, and I don't think he will be picked in the first round, I think that history has shown if you are beneath 5'7", and he could still grow, if he's 5'8", 5'9", it's a different story. But if you're below 5'7", it's almost an impossibility to be drafted in the first round. I think back to Rocco Grimaldi, who's been in the AHL for a good chunk of his career, but it has played a significant number of NHL games. He came, he's bet 5'5", 5'6", and went really early in the second round. I think teams are a little bit more willing to take that risk. The reason I think Mooney still has a chance is because in addition to being an extremely skilled, dynamic player, he's very competitive. He gets after it. He doesn't shy away from anything. He gets into the hard areas. He's just not as strong as the other players. And, that's going to be the burden that he has. His cousin, Logan Cooley, dealt with a lot of size concerns, but Logan wasn't that size. He's bigger than that. So, just know that LJ Mooney is one of my favorite players, to watch. I think that there's so much spark in him and so much energy and grit, and that'll help him as a skilled player. But unfortunately for him, there's things that are beyond his control. And I think we've seen, particularly with players of a certain size, he's probably, you don't scout with a tape measure, but yeah, you do. You do. And I think for him, it's going to be very difficult to be a first round draft pick with the way that NHL teams are going in terms of the size factor. All right, let's go and get to that next question from Danny here, which is about Alex Zetterberg. What are your thoughts on Alex Zetterberg getting drafted as a re-entry? Only 2 games so far, but he has looked pretty dynamic at points for BU. He has looked dynamic at points. I haven't watched a full BU game yet. I do plan to watch some of these full games, but I've watched segments of games, highlights, and other things of that. And what I've seen from Alex Zetterberg so far is a very positive progression and a ease of transition. And the reason that I think he'll have a chance to get drafted this time around is that most of his production last year came among age peers at the under 18 level. He was a dominant scorer at the Swedish U20 level, but again, that's the U20 level. And a player with his dynamic skill set should be able to produce at that level, even though he's not a big player. But he's already got 2 goals through 2 games with BU, and proving it against faster, bigger, stronger competition in college does give him a chance to be drafted. I think if he's not drafted, there's a good chance he'll be a college free agent. But I think that there's at least more of a potential that he is going to be drafted. So with that in mind, I think a player like him, it'll still probably be in the latter half of the draft. But, you look at his numbers last year, 58 points in 45 games in the Swedish U20 ranks for Rebro. And at the international level, at the U18 level, 39 points in 24 games. So this is a player that absolutely has proven that he can score. It's just going to be a matter of, and I explained why I thought him going to the under 18 Worlds, getting hurt in a play where it was like, yep, that's a small player getting hit. That's what could happen. Because with the small players, it's not just about the size. There is a health factor to it. That's why when LJ Mooney took that really hard hit against Notre Dame, I was like, that's going to be real problematic for him if he's hurt and out, because there is a safety and a manpower situation when if you have a player that just physically is continually not being able to play, then that becomes a bigger problem. So I think Zetterberg is showing right now that he deserves a chance. Whether that chance comes before the 5th round, I doubt. But it's not out of the question. If he really blows up, we could be talking about a very different story there. All right. Garrick, frequent commenter, asks, who are your way too early risers and other thoughts pertaining to the 2025 draft? I appreciate all your great work, and I am loving FloHockey so far. I hope you are well. Garrick, thank you so much. So glad that you are enjoying FloHockey. And if you are a fan of any team, you're really able to see a lot more prospects now on Flo. But let's get to your question about these way too early risers, fallers, things of that nature. I think that Michael Meese's start put him back on the map. I don't necessarily think it was a rise. I just think that he was showing that he's there. There's a question about this player coming up next, but I'll talk about him a little bit now. Ivan Ryabkin, who is the top Russian player for this class, or at least the perceived top Russian player for this class, has struggled this season. He has not scored a goal yet. He's gotten he's called up the KHL, but he has a number of assists. He was been a healthy scratch. Dylan Griffin, if you follow him on Twitter, often really looks at a lot of the Russian prospects, and he was sharing some context about Ryabkin and where he's at and kind of what's happening with him, and the fact that he's been healthy scratch, not at the KHL level, but at the MHL level. There were some concerns about fitness and conditioning and other things like that. So things that you don't necessarily want to hear. So yes, I would say Ryabkin is among those that are, it's early, but he's slipping a little bit. We'll have to wait and see exactly where this all goes for him, but that's definitely one where I think it's a little bit of a slipping situation. I think that we're starting to see a little bit of draft decline for some of the players of the national team development program in terms of, there is a lot of guys that were viewed as potential top picks, and I think they have, but this team has struggled out the gates. They haven't won a lot of hockey games. Their players haven't necessarily stood out. And so, you look at that, and each year we come into an early season, and the NTDP is usually going to have a ton of players that are very much in the mix for top 10, top 15. And that will still be the case. They're going to stay up there. But I think you look and you say, right now, some of the players that you were expecting more from aren't giving it to you at this point. And so I think that that's definitely a concern. And as I mentioned, I think, this isn't looking like a great draft class for Americans. Now, the NTDP is about to go play the CHL top draft prospects next month in Ontario in the CHL NTDP showdown. And with that, like, usually by this point you'd say, okay, there's a couple guys on the NTDP that could like take over the game. But if they're going up against Porter Martone and Michael Misa and Matt Schaefer, if he's healthy, Schaefer hasn't been able to play because he's been ill. But like that all helps a lot, and so they don't have that right now. They don't have the ability to match that. So I think that this might have been a bit of a tough year to start that CHL NTP showdown, but we'll see. They're a static team, and the CHL team will be a very new, like an all-star team. So they're not going to necessarily have the cohesion that we'll see there. All right, lots of great questions about the NHL draft. Now we're going to move on, and it's never too early to talk about the World Junior, so we're going to talk about it right now. We got a number of questions about players and their candidacy for the World Junior Championship, which, of course, is December 26th of 2024 in Ottawa is when it will begin. And this one comes to us from Avco Cup, and Avco Cup asks, Kevin He has had such an impressive start to a season after showing quite well in Jets rookie camp and training camp. Has he put himself on Hockey Canada's radar? Could he get an invite to the World Junior Team selection camp? I suppose he could get an invite, but I don't think his chances are altogether strong. He's had a great start to the season with Niagara, really producing. The question I have is, who is he going to knock out of a spot? You look at guys like Berkeley Catton, you look at other players that, Porter Martone, who is he knocking out of the top six? He's not a player that's going to play, he maybe he could play for your third line. He's certainly not going to be playing for your fourth line. To me, I think it's going to be difficult for him to find a role on that team just because of the quality that they have. Now, the good news for a lot of Canadian players is that there are some guys that aren't coming back from pros. We'll see ultimately what happens with Jet Lachenko, who's been with the Philadelphia Flyers, made the team out of camp. Will he stick around for their whole season? Will they loan him out for the World Juniors? There's lots of scenarios left at play with Jet Lachenko. But I really do think that's going to be kind of the determining factor. What do they have? What do they need? What kind of holes do they have to fill? Who can they put into there? And if Luchenko's out, that doesn't necessarily help his cause because, I think that Luchenko was very likely going to be a center there. So I don't think that'll be much of a thing. So I did skip over the question about Ryabkin here. And Marcus, I apologize for doing that because I kind of answered it in the previous one. But, we talked about, is it time to be worried about Ivan Ryabkin? And the answer to that question is no. I don't think that you ever really worry at the beginning of a season, but I will say that there is concern about where he's going next. And so that's one where, you kind of look at it. And that's why I'll point you to Dylan Griffin's tweet thread that he had about Ryabkin, and he was showing some of the good and the bad of him this year. I thought that it was pretty astute observations, in addition to the context that, he's been a healthy scratch and other things like that. And Dylan, really keeps a close eye on the MHL. And the thing is the MHL is such a difficult place to scout because that, obviously it's all on video, but at the same time, there's such a wide disparity among teams that we're seeing. So that's another thing. So, thank you to Josh for bringing that question back to the forefront because I had skipped right over it as I wanted to get into the World Junior talk too. So I'm backtracking, but we'll skip the Avco Cup question because I just answered it. But we will go to the question from Riz, and Riz is asking, has Nick Lardis projections changed since his draft day? And can you see him getting a Team Canada camp invite if he keeps it up? So Nick Lardis, Chicago Blackhawks draft pick, a speedy player, a guy that has Done some really good things in his junior career already. He's shown an ability to score. He had 29 last season. This season he's already got 8 goals in 6 games. I think he's very much in the mix for Canada. I think that that's a guy that you could certainly look to as a 19-year-old, as a second-year guy. I think he fits well into a lower lineup situation. He has played some internationally. He actually had a really nice under-18 World Championship a few years back. Currently playing for the Brantford Bulldogs. You look at the production, 11 points in 6 games. You look at the fact that he can fit a lot of different roles. If he was a little bit bigger, he'd probably have a better chance of playing down Canada's lineup. But that's a player that I think would be in there. Whereas Kevin He, a little bit more of the softer skill, kind of certainly a top 6 guy. But can he be a top 6 guy for Niagara? Can he be a top 6 guy for Canada? And that's where I see the disconnect for those 2 players. So that's where I think Lardis has a better case to play down the lineup and gives him more opportunity to make that team. All right, let's talk about Team USA in this next one. Hockey Night asks, after AJ Spalacy's hot camp at the start of the season, any chance he can elbow his way on to Team USA for this year's WJC? If he keeps progressing at this rate, he looks like a lock for next year. So I thought that Spalacy was one of the better players in terms of pleasant surprises at the World Junior Camp that we went to in the summer. Currently playing for the Windsor Spitfires. He has size at 6'3", over 200 pounds. He has skating ability. He has athleticism. And right now, he's over a point per game with the Windsor Spitfires. Now, what would he be for Team USA? Ultimately, he'd probably be a 4th-line player. And now Team USA's roster, there is a little bit of, shuffling going on. Max Plant, who was very good in World Junior Camp, really exceeded my expectations there. He was injured. It was going to be about 4 to 6 week injury in his first game and an exhibition game with the University of Minnesota Duluth. If that knocks him out of the conversation, then you've got a little bit of roster flexibility, and I think it allows maybe a guy that you were penciling in for the 4th line could potentially play third line now, and that makes a little room for a guy like Spalacy, who would be a wing. He'd be a grinding forechecking forward. He would still be able to produce. I think that he's very much in the mix for this team. I thought that he put himself in the mix in the summer and then had a really strong showing for Chicago in training camp, and then it's translating with his junior season. And I think he's ahead of schedule of where he would be. And I agree with you, Hagen. I think he'd be a lock for next season, probably in a similar role. But this is a guy that I think has very much put himself on the map for the World Juniors. All right. What else do we have here? We got one, and this one comes from our Habs, the Reddit, the subreddit for the Habs, and I always enjoy taking your questions. And this is a good one. Hey, Chris, what's been your impression so far of freshman Michael Hage with the University of Michigan? So let's talk Michael Hage. He was obviously on FloHockey all last year as a member of the Chicago Steel. We had just a tremendous amount of contact with him over the course of the season, many conversations with Michael, a number of stories written about him, plenty of highlight reels. So how's it going in college? Through 4 games, he's got 3 goals and 6 points. I think he's doing pretty well. Now, Michigan has had a bit of a lighter schedule. I think Minnesota State, they split with. They had a win and a tie against Arizona State as well. But Hage has had points in every game. And he's also scoring in similar ways to what he did at the USHL level, which is scoring using his speed to the outside, cutting to the middle, making a play. That's one thing that I think he probably needs to get a lot of credit for, is that when he does have the puck, he's always looking for ways to get to the interior. Now, he can be a perimeter player at times, especially defensively, and it does, it's one of the reasons why I think that it prevented him from being an even higher draft pick. But what we saw from him most of the first few games, and this is another player, I didn't see every game that he's played so far. I've seen snippets of games. But what I've seen is this is a player that is progressing. As he continues to get stronger, he's going to be able to make that move to the middle even more effectively. He'll defend better. He'll do all those things. So, I think at Michigan, he is going to be given the opportunity to flourish in terms of his skill, which he has a boatload of. He has a ton of speed. There's so much to like about his game overall. But over the first, he's got goals in each of his last 3 games. And he has to be good for them. They've lost so much from last year's roster. They need him to be one of their offensive leaders. He has taken that mantle right away. 2 good games so far. Once they get into the teeth of the Big Ten schedule, we'll be able to evaluate them even better. But I think that Michael Hage is definitely progressing and showing that the transition from USHL to college and the fact that his continued progression, because remember, last year, incredible second half of the season, that is continuing in the first half of the season. Not off to the same slow start. He's been through a lot over the last year plus, losing his father in a tragic circumstance, and really for him, watching him continue to flourish, he's the kind of player that you are going to root for because of what he's been through. And I think that really for me, it's been it's not a surprise to see what he's doing for Michigan, but it's certainly, you wonder how a player like him makes the transition. So far, so good. All right, couple more questions. And Patrick asks, who do you see as the Bruins' top unsigned prospect? So this is an interesting one, because I think, unsigned prospect is a very important distinction in this one. When you have unsigned guys, most of the players in your AHL system are signed to NHL contracts. Some of them are not. In terms of unsigned guys, right now, in terms of who the top is, I think it's kind of an obvious answer, maybe not the one that you were looking for. But in terms of top unsigned prospects for me, the answer is Dean Letourneau. He is obviously at Boston College now. He's a first-round draft pick. Upside, ceiling, all of those things are there with him. Did not have a point over his first 2 games. Boston College, they played Michigan State to a split over the weekend. But the things that I was looking for from him was, how was he adjusting to the pace? How was he utilizing his size? And where, what is he going to be able to do at the collegiate level this year? I think that there's a lot of questions left to be answered. The pace seemed to be okay for him. The size, I think he's going to have to figure out how to use that big frame more effectively against bigger, stronger players in college. That's going to take time. That's going to take some reps, but I think the upside for him is there. His hands look good. He had some, he had some looks, and he had the puck a little bit. I think I've said this before. I think he's going to start slow in college. I don't think the points are going to be there this year. Next year, I assume that he's going to have a bigger year. But I think in terms of pure upside of unsigned prospects, he, to me, is the guy that is the most important for them. Others to kind of look at, Chris Pelosi at Quinnipiac. I mean, he's a guy that really impressed me in his USHL season last year. Really impressive World Junior camp. Now he's in college, and we'll see exactly where he goes from there. But I think, if we're talking about top unsigned prospects right now, it's still Dean Letourneau. All right. We finished this one up with an AHL question, and this is from MV Pete. Always enjoy getting your questions and getting questions from Red Wings Nation as a whole. Do you think Sebastian Cossa gets the backup job for the Red Wings next season? Very interesting question, and one that I think if you were to ask the Red Wings, they would hope that that's the case next season. I think that if you were to say, what's the best outcome for Sebastian Cossa, I'd say NHL by next season. What I would say is that if he's going to go into the NHL next season, I would hope that he's going to get around 40% of the starts if he's ready for it. This is the hard part of where the Red Wings are as an organization right now. The pressure is on to make the playoffs. The pressure is on, and the question is are they good enough right now? And I don't know. I don't know if they are going to be good enough to make the playoffs this season. And the thing is if they don't this season, then that's even more pressure on next season. And can you work in your young goalie into his first NHL action in that scenario? Often not. So that's the question I think that the Red Wings are going to have to answer. How do you prioritize Sebastian Cossa's development with what you need right now? Well, they're doing it by keeping him in the AHL for another season. So I think that's the first part. I don't think they should even consider bringing them to the NHL, except for maybe to observe for a little bit and to experience what it's like to be part of the NHL roster. That's about it, because I think that he needs reps. He needs a variety of situations to be put in. He needs to face adversity still, as he has throughout various portions of his career. And I think he needs to basically take a big step forward this year. And because he hasn't been a dominant goalie in the AHL, he's been a good goalie in the AHL. He has not been a dominant goalie in the AHL. And I'm not saying you have to dominate the AHL before you become an NHL starter. Plenty of guys did not do that, but you have to show enough. I think he's getting closer and is as close as he's ever been to being NHL ready right now. The question is if he'll be the backup next year. I think if he is going to be the backup, he better still be getting starts. And you also maybe have to, see what works best for him in terms of where you're going to place him. But I think, yes, that should be a realistic expectation that he's the backup next year for the Red Wings. But he has got to get 70% of the starts, I think, in Grand Rapids this year. Maybe not all the back-to-backs, but, just getting a lot of reps. And again, you'll be able to watch Sebastian Cossa potentially if he's starting in that game on Saturday night for the AHL free game of the week, which will be available on YouTube, X, and on Facebook as well. So definitely do that. All right, that's it for the Q&A, and really that's it for our show. I want to give a huge thanks to everybody that asked questions this week. Want to say a big thanks to Josh for producing today's show. And I also want to thank all of you for listening, because you guys make this thing happen, and we're really excited to do it. Reminder, go ahead and get that FloHockey subscription. You don't want to miss any more of these AHL games. If you missed opening weekend, we got a lot more coming. I know there were some kinks to be worked out. Those are all getting worked out. People are working around the clock to make sure that we give you the best experience here at FloHockey, and really looking forward to getting a lot of that to you very soon. So the AHL, we got the game of the week Saturday for them. The ECHL starts on Friday. Their game of the week also on Friday. So make sure you are tuning in for those free games, and then subscribe so you can watch everything and never miss a moment of the action. That's going to do it for this week's episode of Talking Hockey Sense. My name is Chris Peters. We'll catch you next time.